Hey, welcome everybody to this Off the Cuff. I'm your host, Chris Martinson, of course, and it is August 5th, 2020, dog days of summer. Here with us today to discuss what are pretty exciting developments. John Rubino. John, when was the last time you and I talked when gold was hitting an all-time new record high? When was that?
Well, I don't know exactly when that was, but I know I had black hair when we talked about it. So it was that long ago.
2011, I think we were doing.
Yeah. So it's been a long wait. And, especially long for me since I was really too early with this. I got out at the peak of the last cycle, very happy, and then got back in like 2015, thinking that, stocks should start dropping, gold should start going up right there. Mm-hmm. And had to wait 5 years for it to happen. So, but you know what? Getting something right in the investment world is kind of like the way mothers describe having a baby. It might have been a really hard process to get there, but afterwards you don't remember the hard stuff. You just remember the good things. And that's I'm already feeling that way about gold and silver right now, because at long last they're going in the right direction, and silver is going up faster than gold. So everything's right with the world in that little narrow stretch of the world. Nothing else is right with the world otherwise.
Through that prism, I recently wrote a comment at my site where I said, I'm right on gold, and silver, but for all the wrong reasons. Not the wrong reasons, but I mean, I'm really mixed. I'm ambivalent. I'm really not taking victory laps here, because this just looks like a monetary endgame. This thrashing about this, we're so disconnected from anything nobody can explain any of this stuff. If you talk to super experienced financial professionals, we're going to talk with you today, somebody who's been observing this for a long time, and you ask, what the hell is going on, right? How do you justify this? How do you explain any of this stuff? What's the end game? What's an exit strategy? What is the Fed up to? Their whole thing is, we're just going to print money and keep printing money because that fixes everything. Even though we have 10 years, I submit to you 30 years of experience saying, it only works for a little while, then the heroin wears off and you're left with a really bad hangover. Look at all the bad things that happened while you were partying, right? The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, the middle class got eviscerated, all the ththings that made our country great sort of like eroded. Horrible politicians stay in power because, it's revealed that, it looks like they're being geniuses, all that stuff, right? And so we don't get the cleansing that we've needed. For either capitalism or democracy to operate like as intended. So I don't know. This feels beyond bogus to me at this point in time. But gold and silver are doing well.
Yeah, well, we are towards the end of the process, I think. The end of the process of us trusting the government to do the right thing. There's lots more to come in this thing before we actually get to the end, which is, some kind of a major monetary reset, either in the middle of a crisis or when the crisis is so close that, we can see it coming and the government finally gives up and says, all right, the experiment that started in 1971 has failed. What do we do now? But yeah, when you hear someone from the Fed or Treasury or Congress talk, it's clear they don't understand the meta part of this. They don't understand the stage on which they're acting. They just know about their own little thing where they pull this lever and this thing happens, and that gets us through another week or month or whatever. But they don't understand the bigger forces that are building up, which is amazing that they don't. I mean, it's their life work. Bernanke was an expert on the Great Depression. That was his life work. And the rest of the people who are running the Fed are professional economists, which means if they don't know this one thing that we're talking about, then they don't know anything. They've wasted their lives. And that's kind of what happened with these guys. They know how to use Jim Rickard's analogy that they think they're working with a thermostat, but they're actually working with a nuclear reactor. They know how to turn the dial on the thermostat to get the temperature from 70 to 72, they think. But they don't realize that the mechanism that they're fiddling with is actually a reactor that, once it's over in the red zone, goes critical, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so we're getting close to that. When what we're seeing right now is the dollar fall in value, gold and silver, which are canaries in the coal mine of financial crisis, going up dramatically, and everything else go way up, which looks an awful lot like the Austrian School of Economics crack-up boom at this point, right? Because how else do you explain stocks and real estate hitting record highs in the depths of the worst recession since the Great Depression? You know, normally those cyclical things go down when the economy contracts, but in the quarter ending in June, the U.S. economy contracted at, what was it, like a 35% annual rate? And it's some astounding number that should normally be associated with collapsing financial asset prices. But instead they're soaring, which looks an awful lot like what the Austrians describe as the crack-up boom, where money just pours out of the central bank, flows into financial assets, sends them to the moon, and then inflation starts to spread to other things. Everybody notices it. Everybody gives up on the currency and just bails on it, and that sends prices even higher, and then everything falls apart. So we're in the early stages of something like that. You know, this might not be it, but when it comes, the first part of it will look an awful lot like what we're seeing right now with the dollar tanking and gold and silver soaring. So,
Yeah.
so it could be that this is it.
Well, this has been on my mind a lot lately. Adam and I have been chewing over this, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to assemble all the data. And so the devil's advocate, Adam, I would say, you know, this looks like the crack-up boom. And Adam would say, not so sure, you know, it's always risky to sort of throw in the towel near the top. Isn't that, you know, that's it. They're just going over. So my question back was, well, what else would we need to see to validate that we're really there? What is it? So, you know, the data we might collect would include stocks at all-time highs, certainly on a PE basis. We've never been in valuations this rich. Bonds at all-time highs, right? Record low yields, which is the opposite of bond prices. So record highs there. Gold, record high. We've got food inflation really starting to roar in here right now. So what else would we need to see to be able to go, that's it, we're calling this one? You know, is it unlimited checking accounts for each of us, courtesy of the Fed? I mean, I'm wondering, what are those next signposts? Because we've just blown past like 4 major signposts. What are the next ones here?
Well, we've also got soaring real estate in a lot of places too, which is bizarre when you think about it, except in the context of a crack-up boom. And then you've got governments basically just letting it all hang out financially right now. They don't care anymore about money because they're facing an existential threat, which they perceive the pandemic to be, and the riots and everything that flowed, you know, as much from the lockdown as from those horrendous police brutality videos. And they're just going to spend as much money as it takes. Right now, they're negotiating another bailout bill that the only question is, how many trillions of dollars will it be? Not will we have one, not will it be 100 billion or 500 billion, but will it be 1.7 trillion or 3.4 trillion? And the government deficit this year, will it be 11% of GDP or 15% of GDP? Those are the debates going on right now. And so that certainly sounds like the end of the process when any sense of restraint just disappears because everybody is so panicked. And if you look at some of the underlying indicators like the M2 money supply growth, straight up from here, and you know, government debt straight up, and corporate debt straight up. Corporations are borrowing everything they can get their hands on right now because they want as much cash as possible heading into whatever comes next. So pretty much every indicator of financial excess is through the roof. Oh, and we're just talking about the US so far, but if you look at China, they're actually borrowing more money than us. In the I'm not sure what time frame it was. It was either the first 6 months of this year or the quarter ended in June. They increased their total debt by something like $3.5 trillion in just that period. You know, that eclipsed the annual record for any other country increasing its debt. Yeah. And it wasn't even the US, it was China who did it, you know? So the whole world is in on this right now. Europe, Japan, China, the US. Yep. And we've always all been making the same mistakes, but now we're making all the same mistakes on steroids. You know, we've basically just turbocharged the whole process. So this is either the end or there may be no end to this. You know, we might just be able to do this forever and get away with it. I don't think so, but I didn't think we could get past 2008, 2009. It seemed like that was the end. And now we're doing stuff that seems as extreme to our current eyes as what they did back in the early days of QE seemed back then, right? That seemed crazy. And, you know, we don't consider QE crazy anymore, but we're looking at the stuff that happens now, and this seems crazy. So I don't know. I would say that, you know, the timing of this doesn't really much matter. We know what side of this we need to be on. So it's gotten very easy to make the individual decisions that we have to make, even if we don't know whether they pay off this year, next year, or 5 years from now, because there's no way you want to be in financial assets during this. I mean, they might go up from here, but it's a pure speculation of the worst kind. You want to leave those things to the dumb money and move everything you can into hard assets that governments can't make more of, because they are going to zero out the value of a lot of financial assets going forward. They have no choice, you know, but to push the value of the dollar down, which craters government bonds, which affects stocks in a lot of different ways. All that stuff has to happen. They have no choice. So that means we know what we need to do, which is in a way kind of restful. You know, you don't need to know the timing as long as you know the actions that are appropriate for whenever it is. So, you know, I'm thinking now, is it time to lighten up on some of these gold and silver mining stocks that have just rocketed? You know, so I'm already over on the other side of the equation. You know, should I be taking some money off the table? That's how far this has gone. Because last time you and I talked, was it like in March when everything was crashing? It was not far from that, right? When gold and silver were still in bear markets, and now in just the space of a few months, their gold is at an all-time high and silver is rocketing and everything. So it's a completely different environment. Mm-hmm. And it presents a completely different set of questions. You know, when should we take some money off the table? Which is a nice problem to have, but a problem nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, as big as that problem is, I'm going to present you with an even larger one, and it's this. It's actually a challenge. You can't laugh when I give you this quote from Steve Mnuchin from Sunday. Okay, ready? You got to hold a straight face the whole way through. You ready?
I can't promise anything, Chris.
He said,
if it's Mnuchin.
He's Mnuchin. He said, quote, "We have to be careful about not piling on enormous amounts of debt for future generations."
Oh, you're killing me here. Okay. Okay. I'm not laughing. Yeah. See,
I have to go back to Lily Tomlin, who said, you know, as cynical as I am, I find I just can't keep up. You know, these people, mm-hmm. They just say anything, and it just has no basis in reality whatsoever. The U.S. government is going to pile on more debt this year, three plus trillion, right? They're looking at an extra 2 trillion, but I guarantee you it's going to expand for some magic reason, elections or whatever, before the end of the year. So three and a half trillion this year. And that's just cash accounting debt. When you look at the pile of IOUs that are also there for all the entitlement programs, all that, the actual accrual basis debt might grow, deficit might grow, I don't know, 7 trillion this year, something. That would be pretty typical. So you look at that and you think that like basically the whole first 248 years of the country, you didn't even get that much debt piled on, and then all at once, 1 year. So I found that a pretty humorous statement, just because it's such a bald-faced piece of ridiculousness there.
Well, these guys have learned a lesson from the past couple of decades, and unfortunately, it's the wrong lesson. But the lesson they've learned is that you can borrow as much as you want to with impunity, and it really doesn't matter. You know, there's an entire school of thought now that says we shouldn't even have debt. We should just have the government print as much money as it needs to finance itself. Which is kind of what we're doing right now. In effect, you know, we're still doing these steps where we tax people and we borrow money and then we print money, but all we really have to do is print money in this the new modern monetary theory framework. And these guys have bought into that. Even if they don't use the term, they have come to believe that that it's possible to just borrow as much money as you need to get through whatever crisis you're in and then worry about it later forever. And that's just astounding. You know, it's a whole generation of people who in the political sphere have never had to say no to anybody because they've always been able to create enough money to satisfy all their different constituents. And on Wall Street, kind of the same thing, because they can take any risk they want to. They can take on as much debt as they want, and the government bails them out if it doesn't work out. So you've got this whole generation of elites in the US and really around the world who have learned that there are no limits on what they want to do. They can just do anything because they have an unlimited printing press. And history says that ends in disaster, and common sense says that ends in disaster. But these guys don't really seem to be plugged into those two things. You know, they seem to be looking at what's on the desk in front of them right this minute, and what they have to do to get away with whatever it was they got in trouble with, and how they're going to do it. And they've gotten away with it for such a long time that it doesn't occur to them that it might not work. And that is just terrifying, because that, Chris, that kind of takes us back to that question that pops up every once in a while about the nature of the people in charge right now. Are they complete morons, you know, blundering blindly off this cliff? Or are they evil geniuses enacting a long-term plan that ends with a nation of debt serfs run by a tiny aristocracy? And I don't know which is scarier, but there's evidence for both of those theses out there. And you know, you see it when you look at these guys and watch them on TV and hear what they say, because either they're just dumb as a bag of rocks, or they're playing us really effectively. And I really don't have an opinion right now. You know, I don't know which is which, you know, because it could be either based on what they do. There's evidence for both of those ideas, and they're both terrifying ideas, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so this is the crux of the whole thing, is to ask, well, is something actually different now? And so again, Adam and I have these very long conversations, and I've been sort of, if I was writing a thriller novel, right, but it would be fiction, it would go something like this: that sometime between the year 2000 and 2007, there was this sort of rise of computerized trading. And people were sort of working it out, and we had some weird stuff. And between 2008, 2010, it's sort of getting worked out. We have flash crashes and stuff like that. But that ultimately the ecosystem of trading is now 100% computerized for all practical purposes. This whole idea that investors were cheered by or something is just quaint, right? That true investors are a fraction of the volume. The volume is lightning fast, literally, and you know, it's operating at you know, microsecond timescales, and then the rest of this novel would say, well, the authorities have a vested interest in making sure that markets function, you know, and a functional market for the Fed is always going up to the right, you know, and that they would have a computer program that had learned over time where the pressure points were, you know, where you could get the most bang for the bucks. And maybe there's even secret wink deals with big firms like Citadel, who control 20% of all trading. Ben Bernanke is now, former Fed chairman, is now sitting over there, you know, with a job with them as their chief macroeconomist, you know, in case you need a macroeconomist to help you guide your microsecond decisions. And so then you would have a deal with them to say, hey, listen, you know, critical moments, whenever we're approaching a key moment, we want things to go the other direction. You're with us, right? You know, and so they would know. And as I'm writing this fantasy novel, it's a pretty simple story. They say, well, we're going to sell the volatility index. We'll either use a combination of puts or directly selling, you know, ETFs around that. But anyway, we're going to crush the volatility index, and at the same time, we're going to pump a bunch of money into various index futures, and we're also going to come over here and pile on with some options, right? Buy some calls. You do those sorts of things, and it creates this pressure for things to go up. And the rest of the ecosystem of computers out there, they don't care. They have zero interest in fundamentals, zero interest in next quarter's earnings, zero interest in any of that quaint stuff. What they care about is, where's this thing going right now over the next few seconds? And they all sort of pile in, and then everything's going that way, right? That's how I kind of see stuff now, is that we have, and that was told so many years ago. They worked that out like in 2008, you know. Here we are 12 years later, and my view is that we have, double air quotes, markets, right, that are no longer signaling anything. They're not useful. They're not sending any information, but they go up. And that is useful because then you get to write the stories that make everybody feel good. And you convinced everybody that a rising market is somehow good for all of us, when it's actually good for relatively few of us and really good for very, very few of us, right? So that's kind of how I see stuff now. It's hard for me to even like think of the markets as doing anything useful from a signal standpoint, from a price standpoint, discovery standpoint. So based on that, though, to get back to your instrumentation analogy, I truly believe that we are now, got a ship that's under sail that doesn't have any reasonable instrumentation, and we're off the map. We're in this new area, but they've convinced themselves, to your point, that there's no harm in this, that it works, that it keeps everything together. The rationalization on balances is good for everybody. That's kind of how I see it now. I've lost any connection to the idea that there's utility in trying to figure out if things are appropriately priced and what that might be telling me.
Well,
too jaded?
Yeah. No, I mean that, and what you're describing is the end of actual capitalism, because markets have a function. They're not just public policy levers that you pull in order to generate, extra consumer spending at some point down the road. They are price signaling mechanisms that tell entrepreneurs how to allocate capital. And when you hijack them for public policy purposes and just make them go up forever, what that says to entrepreneurs is take any risk you want to, just load up. We'll lend you a ton of money. And then when you go public, your stock will go up forever. So you get a lot of investment that shouldn't happen, or shouldn't happen in the form that it happens. They call that malinvestment in economics. And by definition, it doesn't generate enough cash flow to cover the obligations that were taken on in order to create whatever it was we're talking about. And you get a society that is poorer and poorer year after year because it's generating negative cash flow. And that, it's a perfect description of what we have now. You've got negative interest rates all around the world, which by definition means the capital that's invested in those bonds shrinks instead of grows. And you've got corporations borrowing record amounts of money and investing it in things that almost certainly aren't going to work out in any meaningful way. And then you've got individuals borrowing huge amounts of money to buy stuff they don't really need and they can never hope to pay off. So you've got a whole society in which interest rates can never go back up, which means the interest rate market will never send a useful signal again to entrepreneurs. And if interest rates can never go back up and we value stocks relative to interest rates, then stocks are never going to go back down or never going to fluctuate in a way that tells you anything useful. So there are no signals out there. We are completely flying blind, which means we don't have the society we used to have. We think we're a capitalist society, but we no longer are. But we're also not a socialist society. We're not anything definable right now because we stopped being one thing, haven't become the other thing yet, and we don't know where this goes. And again, maybe the guys in charge do know where it goes, and they have an end point at which things get so bad that they declare martial law, and that's the end of the cycle. But then we have kind of an oligopoly or some kind of a police state or whatever. Where we are basically subservient without the Bill of Rights anymore. Maybe that's the end game. I don't know. But if it is the end game, we're not that far from it. If you look at the civil unrest right now, in a lot of cities, it's bad enough for a declaration of emergency and for federal troops to come in to stop the carnage. So if that spreads much more, maybe that's the excuse. I really hope not. I mean, I still hold out a little bit of hope that there's a monetary reset solution to all this that puts us back on a halfway decent track. But man, at the rate we're taking on debt, see, to do a monetary reset, which is to say, go back to the gold standard with gold at $10,000 an ounce, which means a big devaluation of the dollar, you're in effect devaluing all the debt that people hold, not the borrowings, but the assets part of the ledger. Say you've lent money to me. Well, if we devalue the dollar dramatically, that helps me, but that screws you over because this asset you thought you had is now worth 1/3 as much. So the more debt we take on, the bigger the turmoil that flows from some kind of a reset, as all the bondholders out there, all the lenders get just creamed because they trusted the government and held assets that are denominated in the local currency. So you get turmoil maybe on a scale that's unimaginable and unmanageable at a certain point. And we may be heading to that point because somebody owns all this debt that's being taken on, some pension fund, some bond fund, and those people are the ones who are going to be hurt by the supposedly relatively pain-free solution of a monetary reset. And if we can't do that, what's left? I don't really have a solution other than some kind of French Revolution thing. Then we have to go way back in time to the 1780s and the guillotines and things like that, or to the German hyperinflation in the 1920s that gave us Hitler. So I'm becoming less and less optimistic about us being able to get out of this the further we go into it. This needs to end soon to give us a chance of successfully navigating what comes next.
I don't think that's on the table anymore. Go back to the original question I've been asking for a decade, which is when you get to the end game, you only have to answer one question, which is who's going to eat the losses, right?
Yes.
And so there's always a set of bag holders in this story. And so the question is who's going to be the bag holders? People are increasingly worried about that, right? We're seeing a lot of attention and interest in people getting their money over to New Harbor to have them manage it, because New Harbor at least has got a very viable strategy for saying, we're going to work hard to make sure we don't lose this, which is a very easy thing to do in these stories. If you're in a typical 401k and your company says you can either choose from this suite of long only bond funds or long only stock funds, darn good chance you end up being a bag holder in this story, right? You put in the equivalent of $100,000 today and you get back the equivalent of $50,000 in the future. And they're like, oh, darn, bad luck. What are you going to do? And stuff went against you.
Chris,
but that purchasing power went somewhere. It didn't just evaporate. They like to pretend like, oh, it just went away. Like CGI animation when your computer breaks down. Just we don't know. Actually, it's a strategy, right? So this is the Federal Reserve has just come out this week saying they're unsatisfied with the level of inflation. They're going to bring it higher. Of course, we already have massive inflation, and we've talked about them. Inflation in stock prices, real estate in certain locations, gold, silver, bonds, you name it, right? But now they want milk to go higher, right? So they're saying to the average person, to speak of these revolutions, right? They're saying, hey, we know millions of you lost your job. We know that we rewarded billionaires preferentially. We kind of think we should punish you with higher prices now. That would be awesome. And just, there's two types of revolts that can happen. Sure, we have the old school French Revolution revolts, but there's another revolt that I think is happening. I'd like to get your take on, which is that we just heard that roughly a third, I think it was 32% of households didn't quite make their housing payment last month. So this is renters and people mortgages. They either forgot to pay entirely or paid only part of what they were due in rent or a mortgage payment. That's a form of revolt, isn't it? Where people just sort of say, geez, this feels unfair. You're giving all this money to billionaires and I got to make my rent payment. How about no? That's a form of revolt in this story.
Well, yeah. I mean, mass default is one way for this to end, right? That's the 1930s deflationary depression scenario. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see that happen. There are an awful lot of people who owe money they can't pay right now. And so the question for the government is, are we going to give them the money so they can pay their bills with no real hope of them ever being able to pay us back? Because these jobs, a lot of them aren't coming back. Or are we just going to let them default right now and see what happens? See, what we chose in 2008, 2009 was to bail out the elites by pushing up stock prices and taking care of the banks and letting all the, the people who had mortgages in the housing bubble go bust and lose their houses. So that worked last time for them. So it's possible that they consider that to be a viable option. But God, there are so many more people this time because it's so much broader. I mean, it's like you said, it's renters as well as mortgage holders who can't maintain their homes unless they get some kind of government help. But that was always the end game scenario in the, you know, dollar collapse scenario, where we reach a point where the crisis is so huge that governments have to bail out everybody in sight. There's no one left behind, because no one can be left behind, because if one domino falls, they all fall. So we end up bailing out everybody with newly created currency, and just worrying about tomorrow. Um, and that, I mean, that's what we're doing functionally. We're going to try to bail everybody out, and we'll see if it's possible. See, we're in such uncharted territory that you can't say anything is impossible or anything is possible. You know, we just don't know. We've never tried to do this before, so we'll find out. But it sounds like that's what they're going to try to do. You know, they are going to try to bail out everybody, and we'll just see where it leads. But yeah, it is hilarious to hear the Fed talk about unacceptably low inflation. I mean, these guys, they look out into a world where real estate is soaring, and stocks are soaring, and bonds are soaring, and healthcare is getting more expensive all the time, and college tuition is through the roof, and they're unhappy with the slow increase in prices. It's baffling. But see, that's what scares me so much, because my first impression is, wow, what a bunch of morons.
Mm-hmm.
But that might not be true. It might be some really smart guys pretending to be morons to further some really scary, nefarious plan that they've got going. And I don't know. I mean, can they be that stupid though, Chris? You know, are we being snowed by the fact that these guys are pretending to be so stupid that we can't believe they're pretending? You know, we think they must be that stupid if they're saying this stuff.
No, we know they're lying. We know they are.
Yeah.
We know they are, because Jay Pants on Fire Powell comes out and says the Fed isn't responsible, absolutely is not responsible for any wealth gaps, right? Come on. He's not that dumb. He's a smart guy. He knows better than that. So that's a lie. Straight up, no question about it, hands down. He's just lying about that. So I'm the kind of person that knows that if you're going to lie to me to my face once, you're probably doing it other times too, you know? So that's just sort of me. So when we look at this idea of bailouts, though, I see that, so let's say they give, you know, $1,200 stimulus checks to a house. The house has a variety of things they could do with that. The chart says that people saved it, used it to pay mortgages and rent and stuff like that, used it for bills, paid down credit card debt, stuff like that, right? So, and indeed, we saw a pretty big collapse in credit card overall owed amounts this past month. We saw that, you know, people, the bank deposits went through the roof. So I tend to believe that what people said they were going to do with it happened. The part of this story I don't believe. And so this is, again, I've just become so distrustful through all of this, watching pharma companies astroturf us to try and sell us $1,000 a pop bogus junk that doesn't work, you know, in cahoots with our national health agencies, and on and on and on. It's just like a fourth turning, lost all faith in all institutions. So we get to earnings, and Apple says, oh, we didn't just smoke the quarter, we blew it out. We sold 11% more across every single area. It was like 9% in some Asian countries, 11% in the United States, but they sold more iPhones than ever before. And I'm thinking, how'd you do that with stores closed and manufacturing plants shut down and people saying they were going to save money and pay down stuff, and then they actually did that? Where'd that come from? I'm a little suspicious of that. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but remember when FASB in 2009, I think, they came out with a bunch of rules. They were like, wow, that mark-to-market stuff really hurt. And they passed a series of arcane rules that allowed corporations to mark to other things. And they had a rule change in there, which I've been searching for. I had trouble finding yesterday, but I remember it distinctly, where basically it was like, in times of national security, certain leeways will be allowed too, right? Because you wouldn't want people to lose faith and a panic to happen. And you can sort of understand the argument in the context of, geez, if one CDO company goes belly up because they're actually honest, you wouldn't want that to spread, you know. But I could see that over, you know, the camel nose under the tent thing over time. I could see that morphing into, this would be an inconvenient time to have flat earnings. You know, Apple, just here's a few extra. Make that a happy talk this time. But I couldn't make sense of those numbers. I couldn't make sense of Facebook having, you know, a record amount of advertising revenue with the boycott that was going on, with 30% of companies sort of in deep trouble and not advertising because a lot of their advertising is, you know, local SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, on and on. I just couldn't make sense of that stuff, you know? And so the cynical part of me says, maybe I shouldn't believe those results. It felt off to me. Any thoughts there?
Well, there's a thing called channel stuffing, where if you make something, you ship it to the stores that sell it, and then you count it as a sale, even if it hasn't been sold in the store yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one possibility with some of the, at least with the companies who actually make things, that they're getting more leeway to be able to indulge in channel stuffing. So it could be that a lot of returns are going to come back to them, and they're going to have to reverse out some of these gains. But by then, the economy will be growing again, and inflation will be up again, and everything will be good, in the hopes of the people who are allowing them to channel stuff right now. That's one possibility. Or they're just flat out lying and knowing they can get away with it because it's in the national interest. So it's like when the NSA or the CIA lies to us because it's for our own good, because they've got to protect us. Well, maybe it's the same thing at work now, where these big companies that are too big to fail and that dominate the market need to report good earnings, and they're just going to be allowed to say anything they want to. Because remember, that's what China does with their economy. The entire Chinese economy is just made up numbers.
Yeah,
they just report what their 6% gain and everything. Yep. every time, and a lot of the global economy's optimism is based on the growth of China, the Chinese economic miracle. So this isn't that far from that, and it could be. We are probably so full of false flags and other kinds of lies right now that that when they're sorted out, it'll be astounding that they got away with it, because there's just so much. Yep. Hey, Chris, speaking of weird things that are even weirder than what we're talking about right now, did you see the UFO announcements of the last?
Yeah, and I've been talking about that a lot with people privately. I put a comment behind the paywall at my site, which I said, I remember when they came out with the first TikTok video in 2017, and at the time, and I talked about it with some Peak Prosperity members, Me Monkey, a couple others, because just like, that's odd. The Navy doesn't just go, oh, hey, look at this crazy thing we caught off of this Raytheon FLIR pod on an F-18, one day. That's weird, right? They released that on purpose, and then it went quiet, and then they came out with it again. And that New York Times article, right, talking about how the former director of this program that was supposed to be shut down, that wasn't shut down, his opinion is that we've recovered extraterrestrial, debris or something to that effect, right? And I'm like, they don't just say that for fun, right? That's cleared. It has to be cleared at a high level. So my speculation was we're being softened up for release. That would just make 2021 for the books, right?
Oh my God. Because if they're setting us up for not having this election, an emergency involving aliens would be probably better than an emergency involving, China or Russia or something like that. It probably makes us more malleable if that's the goal. And so in that sense, it could be just a false flag. It could be they're setting us up for something where they're going to need to do some really extreme thing, and they need us to sit back and let it happen because of this other really extreme thing. And, Chris, isn't it frustrating in this world where everything that happens, we have to immediately think, okay, what if it's a false flag? Should we even believe that it happened? And we never really know the actual truth about anything anymore, because these guys have demonstrated over and over again that they're happy to lie to us about all kinds of things. So we never really know what's true at all. And then the deepfake videos are either here or coming soon, where they could, somebody with enough processing power could recreate this interview between me and you, have it be us on screen and saying completely different things, Oh,
no, easy. That's easy. That's so 3 years ago that we know about, right? Yeah. So on the fun intellectual exercise side, I've been challenging myself with the idea if the whole UFO alien thing sort of comes out as being true, or it's released as true, and they say, by the way, we have above unity energy generation 0.3. We have unlimited energy because we've sort of reverse engineered or been granted access to this superior technology. I'll have to rethink everything.
Oh my God.
Everything, right? And it's just climate change, how many people we could support, what's available to us to travel to other places. Everything changes all at once. So that was sort of my thinking behind why you would trickle truth this out very slowly, is that you're doing that to prep people, because it would be a real shock. I mean, obviously a lot of religions are going to have trouble with that sort of an idea. And I'll have to, if these things turn out to look like humanoids, I have a whole line of thinking I have to go through, like, oh, wait, is this convergent evolution, or is there something magic about this shape, or did they seed the earth, or, because why wouldn't they look like octopuses? I don't know. Right. But on and on and on. But I did for sure, whether that's actually true or it's a false flag, for sure, the ground is being prepped.
For something. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But there are variants of the first contact idea that are basically just event horizons, right? You can't look beyond them and have any idea of what the world will be like.
Yeah.
Because they could be so extreme. And then there are other ones where life goes on, where they announce, yeah, we got this stuff. We can't really explain what it is. And that's all we really know right now. And then, not much changes. And then our old assumptions still hold. But yeah, you're right. I've got to admit this, because this is how narrowly focused I am right now. But my first impression, my first thought when I saw that stuff come out in the New York Times was, wonder what that means for gold. I'm still thinking about my investments, in the most important thing that ever happened to humanity. But I still am, I still want to know what it means for the money I have committed to different things, if this turns out to be true. But there's no way to know, because we don't know exactly what it is that they're prepping us for, right? Mm-hmm. It could be big, could be small, could be somewhere in between, or it could be completely unrelated to aliens. That's the thing. Maybe that's just to soften us up, and we don't hear any more about that after they use it as an excuse.
Right. Well, presuming those Navy tapes that they've released, tapes, looks how old I am, recordings. Nobody uses tape anymore. Presuming those weren't just some sort of deep fake CGI sort of a moment. That's clearly some unexplainable junk going on there by conventional human technology at this point in time. The speed of these things, how fast they were able to maneuver, the fact that they were leaving no signature trails whatsoever in terms of heat or cold. There was no temperature thing, because these were advanced optics they were using. We were just released the best recordings you could hope for, because it was recorded with such a high tech FLIR system that this is a very unexplained thing happening here before your eyes. Okay, that's now I know it's hard for people to wrap their minds around, but that's actually, whether that was created as a fake or it's a real recording or whatever the story is, that's now been released on purpose. And I'm curious about that purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Why now? And why this stuff? Because there's probably other things they could have said, but they chose to say what they said, release what they released at this time. Mm-hmm. And, hopefully it's obvious afterwards why. But you just never know in this world. Yeah.
I both look at what did and what did not happen. So I did not see other governments of the world pile on and say, oh yeah, we've noticed that too, right? Russia didn't come out and confirm that, and Peru didn't, and China didn't, and India didn't. Nobody else came out and said, yeah, us too, So either the United States is truly the exceptional country and the space beings know to only visit us, or everybody else is staying tight-lipped about this, or our country's about to run another sort of a psyops on its people. Can't quite, I don't know, but it's fun. I enjoy thinking about it.
And another fun aspect, well, maybe not fun or funny, but we'll see. Aspect of this is that, if we're in touch with aliens, that means the humanity's representative is Donald Trump for the negotiations. Yeah, you cannot make this stuff up. 2020. I think
I saw Gary Larson Far Side panel that was along that vein, where first contact is made and the UFO creatures look like fire hydrants and the greeting agent is a dog. I remember that one.
Okay. Yeah.
So, well, but let me circle back around. So tell me your own personal, do you have a red line in the sand that you would say, that's it. Hair on fire. Anything that even looks like a dollar bill in a bank account, or I'm going to hunt into sofa cushions. I'm just getting rid of all of this junk right now. And I don't care. I'm just going to buy whatever's not nailed down that looks like a hard asset. Do you have a bright red line in the sand?
Oh yeah. When the consumer price index starts going up, when this last little remnant of the financial system that is not being inflated at an accelerating rate starts to go too, then I think it's game over. Because when you get inflation as it's defined by the government of 3, 4, 5%, which is what they're shooting for right now,
Mm-hmm.
why in the world would you own a negative interest rate bond? I mean, how do you justify any financial asset that doesn't have extreme pricing power somehow, that can't raise the income that it gives you at a rate that's faster than the currency is inflating away. So which means you don't want any bonds at all. And you only want stocks that have really, stocks of companies with extreme pricing power. In other words, companies that can raise their prices at 10% a year and get away with it somehow. Nobody else is worth owning in an event like that, in an era like that. And so you want to be totally in precious metals and farmland and a handful of other things at that point. I mean, you want to be there now,
Mm-hmm.
but you if you aren't, by the time the CPI comes out and prints 5%, then you better be, because that's when the whole thing starts to end. That's when it becomes the 1970s for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And people of a certain age will remember when inflation hit like 14% and everybody was terrified the dollar was going to collapse and interest rates went to 20%. That would be the early stages of what's coming. It would go there and then it would get much worse. So yeah, when the CPI starts rising and it starts to look parabolic, then bail. Go work on your farm,
Yep.
take care of your goats, can your vegetables and stuff like that, and then tune back in 5 years later and don't even bother paying attention to what's going on in the world.
Tend your goats.
Yeah.
Um, old Persian proverb, which says, if you have no problems, get a goat. Remember that, okay? Because they're trouble. I tell you what, they come out every. So for me, my bright red line in that sand is when a UBI, universal basic income, or some emergency stimulus payment that's temporary, which is going to last forever, because that you can't undo that stuff. It's always an election year or close. So that's when that is exceeds the amount that somebody would be getting by working at slightly more than minimum wage to account for all the friction in that particular story.
That
So then,
would do it. That's reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, because the logic there is that then companies everywhere, from Papa John's Pizza or whatever, they're going to have to pay substantially better than the do nothing universal basic income in order to attract somebody.
Well, Chris, they're going to have to do that anyhow, because the government that would introduce UBI would also raise the national minimum wage dramatically. So they will by law have to pay 15 to 20 bucks an hour in a world where everybody has UBI. So, we're looking at a confluence of things like that at some point, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just saw that a proposal's was put out to, I don't know what the term would be, but forgive $30,000 of student debt per student. Right. And the Democrats are like 30,000. The Republicans are like, no, that's totally intolerable. We need to give that money to Goldman Sachs, I guess, or something, whatever their story is. Right. But, and again, that's just a bailout, though, but it's not a bailout of the students. You watch, they're not going to say, we're just going to write that off, and the holders of that $30,000 of debt that getting canceled lose that. They'll pay the $30,000 out. So the holders of that will probably be made whole. So in that story, notice the $30,000 was spent by the students, and it went to a university, which paid the college professors and janitors and assistant provost deans of diversity, or whatever their whole job classifications were. That money is already spent, and that debt payment will come back. And now there's a big blob of money over there at the Fannie Mae. I'm sorry, who are the holders? Who's the big GSE for that?
Sallie Mae, right?
Sallie Mae. Yeah. So then they'll have that. This is what I love when you print money to cover up a debt, you actually get 2 units of money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's the original unit of money spent, and then there's the printed money that pays for covering that debt. So So it's a 2-for-1.
Yeah, and really nothing is off the table right now. Sure, they'll do student loans. They'll move Medicare eligibility down to 60 or 50 or some number like that, and they'll start extending mortgage forbearance. All of this stuff. See, that's what they're negotiating right now. It's like, who do we bail out this time? With the idea that we're eventually going to bail out everybody at some point, but who gets it first is the only question now, because everybody's going to get bailed out.
Well, this is easy. This is easy. Obviously, if you were the student who worked through school and didn't take out any money, loser, giant L. If you're the student who then paid back as much as they could and you just extinguished your student debt, loser, giant L for this part of the story. So clearly what you want to be is the most reckless, profligate, speculative, ne'er-do-well you possibly could be. I think I got to go down to my banker and see what kind of line of credit I can open up here, because that's one of my strategies for when we pass our bright red line. Is I'm not just going to throw my cash out the window.
Think about it. If you well, say you mortgage your house and you buy gold, and the government comes around and forgives your mortgage, and you just got a bunch of free gold. That's a pretty good deal until they try to confiscate your gold. So that's the second stage of the process. It's like, okay, we're going to bail out all the borrowers now, and then we're going to confiscate the assets of the people that didn't borrow a lot of money. And that's the second stage of the intellectual process. It's pretty easy at this point to know what to invest in, but how to protect that stuff is a whole separate challenge in the world that's coming. And books are going to be written on how to keep 70% of what you own in the world that's coming. And you can't keep 100%. That's impossible. But how do you keep 70%? And I really don't have a good answer. You know what? I think silver is better than gold from that point of view, because it's an industrial metal, which they can't really confiscate very easily, because then they're taking stuff from solar panel manufacturers and the chip guys and everything. But so that it's a little better from the confiscation point of view, and that's one thing. But there's a lot of other stuff like farmland, which is just sitting there. You can't hide it. If they come for your land, there's nothing you could do about it, because you can't take it with you. So it's a tough one, and it's probably coming.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to put a lot of thinking into that, because it's the keeping. It's going to be the tricky part.
Oh, that's got to be another chapter in Crash Proof for you guys.
Yeah.
How to keep it at the other end of this.
Yeah. I don't know. I've had a lot of ideas over time, but watching the degree of overt corruption at this point in time makes me think it's going to be harder than I thought at the time. Kodak, right?
Well,
watch.
Oh yeah, Kodak.
For people who don't know, we're laughing about how Kodak gets this $756 million free bonus from the Trump administration to become a pharmaceutical manufacturer. A great reinvention late in life. And the day before that announcement was made, Kodak shares churned like crazy, and the chairman got 1.75 million options from the board because, well, undisclosed, unpreviously announced, but they just felt like that would be a good time. And it's just like such overt corruption, and nothing's going to come of that.
Or Chris, maybe they're just so smart that they're able to time these events, and you got to be impressed with somebody who's that. Yeah.
Well, that level of corruption makes me think that, I'm going to have to put more thought into how. That's a good question. How do you keep it?
Because remember, we've got an incredibly corrupt government coming our way, desperate for funds coming our way, and then we've got surveillance capitalism, where the companies that basically manage our communications know everything we're doing, so there are no secrets. So that doubles the complexity for someone who wants to try to keep stuff, because if you move your Bitcoin overseas, they know you did that. Mm-hmm. And if you buy a bunch of gold and you bury it in your backyard, they know you bought it, right? Mm-hmm. So all they have to do is just show up and say, hey, we're just going to walk around your property with metal detectors, and you don't mind, stuff like that. And so it's very hard to be anonymous anymore, mm-hmm. and to actually protect things from a rapacious government. That gives us another decade of stuff to talk about. That's the only upside, though, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless UFO technology is a real thing, then
then it's the event horizon, and we'll step through it and see what it's like on the other side. But that we're joking about it, but very seldom does a primitive culture survive contact with an advanced culture.
Yeah.
Very few primitive cultures are happy that they've met an advanced culture after the fact. So who knows? Hopefully it's just a stupid government false flag, and that's all there is to it. And that would be the best outcome for this. That our government is lying to us about some big terrestrial thing. That's the
best outcome
scenario. Yeah.
You got to find hope where you can in 2020.
Hey, when you have a bunch of bad choices, the least bad is all you can hope for. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, we didn't even get to it. I mean, dollarcollapse.com, you've been on the dollar collapse idea for a long time, and the dollar is falling. It doesn't feel like it's collapsing to me. It just sort of feels like it's bouncing in a channel it's been at for a long time. But closing remarks, what's anything about the dollar seem unusual to you here?
Well, it's starting to fall, or it has been lately. And part of that is because, the government is doing some really extreme financial things. It's responding to this crisis the way it did to previous crises, only with an extra zero on everything. So, so finally the numbers are catching people's attention.
Yeah.
And this might be a blip before the dollar goes back up because the rest of the world is in even a bigger mess, or it could be the beginning of a long-term downtrend for all, or a dramatically lower trend for all the big fiat currencies.
Yeah.
And we don't know that. You don't know these things until after the fact, but this is what it'll look like when it happens. So we're getting a glimpse of the future regardless. And we'll know over the next few months whether, if the dollar keeps falling, it has a chance to become a kind of a waterfall decline where people see that and they panic, because everybody's a day trader now, and it wouldn't take much for that to become a trend, that people want to jump on, and they'll push it down further. So things will get crazier before they stop being crazy. But the dollar is one of the components of the current crazy right now.
Well, I was talking with a couple of people who are just finishing up long careers at the State Department, asked them about the next election. And they said the view inside the department among the career people who work there and their contacts overseas is this next election really matters. And they were trying to be as apolitical as they could, but pretty much they said if Trump wins again, there's a lot of prestige and goodwill that's going to kind of just be thrown in the bin. And with that, I think the dollar owes a lot of its strength to some of that prestige and goodwill, over time, right? You want to hold the currency of the of Rome, and so there's a sense there that maybe Caligula's in charge or something like that at this point in time. Although I got to be honest, basement Biden is not a stronger.
Yeah.
But listen, anybody listening, I'm totally apolitical. I like a pox on both their houses, but I can't see any good. I don't see any good outcome of November. I think one way or the other, we're fractured. One way or the other, half the country's disappointed. One way or the other, we've ended up with a not strong leader. One way or the other, I just see this as trouble. But they were of the opinion that a Trump win would be precipitous in terms of international relations. I don't have any way of assessing if that's true or not. But I just thought it was interesting that this election really looks like a pretty important one.
Well, an important one without a very good conceivable outcome, though.
Right.
Like you said, I mean, okay, we lose Trump and we get Biden, and is that, I actually have a really good friend here. We were talking about this the other day, and she's, liberal, and she's all excited about getting rid of Trump. And I said, yeah, but Biden, and she said, well, he's going to die right away. And then we'll get his vice president, and maybe it'll be Kamala Harris or something, so that's a convoluted thought process there. But I think it's one that a lot of people are buying into right now, that, okay, Biden is a non-entity, but he won't be around for very long. So we don't really have to, we'll just get him in there, and then the government will work itself out as he sickens and dies. But I don't know, again, if that's the best you can hope for, we're in a tough spot right now.
Yeah. So anyway, again, not political. Yeah. I just do think that there's very strong chance of increased volatility in and around that event.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, because we don't even know if we can physically do an election right now. And so, what if it takes 3 weeks to count all the ballots, and you've got
Yeah.
lawyers swarming over the ballot boxes and everything, and and
Yeah.
it's fairly close, and it goes, it could go to the Supreme Court again. If the ballot, if these mail-in ballots are the mess that they might turn out to be. So yeah, it could be incredibly volatile. So normally, finance, when you screw it up, it screws up your politics, and then politics gets screwed up and feeds back into finance. So this might be a case where politics affects the financial markets big time towards the end of this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to confess, I think that if you did want to run a campaign and you needed a company that could figure out where everybody lives, that's got to be the company in charge of the extended auto warranties that I've never bought, because they always know where I am.
and they know what car you've had for the last
Really? They
20
do.
years.
They know
Each
all
car,
of it.
they know about all of it. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I think there is somebody who could run an election right now, and it would be somebody like Amazon or some of these, or the credit agencies or something like that.
Yep.
But I definitely don't think it's the federal government. So they're not going to be able to do a good job at all.
No, they're going to contract it out at the state level to these shady companies that sprang up 3 weeks ago, who happens to be the cousin of the assistant attorney general or whatever of the state. I mean, it's always like that,
And if they don't do mail-in voting, they're going to do electronic voting,
Yeah.
where they have these machines that a 17-year-old hacker can get into in 5 minutes, and with no paper trail. So
Best we can do.
Yeah. That's why one of the reasons the dollar has been so strong for so long relative to other currencies is that we're perceived to do it better than other countries. But the list of things we do better is rapidly shrinking right now. So and if we screw up this election, there won't be much left that we're better at than anybody else. So there'll be no reason to keep the dollar as a reserve currency. So yeah.
That's how it goes. All right. Well, what's going on at your site right now? You got any good articles going on you want to tell people about?
Yeah, I think I'm going to post something this week about what UFOs mean for gold, because I've been thinking about that. And yes, there's an awful lot to write about. So I've been churning out some stuff that sometimes is political now. I'm trying to avoid that, though, because it's such a minefield. No matter what you say, you enrage a lot of people. And my impulse is to try to get people to look beyond the immediate enemy to the aristocracy, which is the real enemy. But to do that, you have to say, the mayor of Portland really isn't this evil socialist mastermind. Don't worry. And that just enrages a lot of people. So I don't know. My impulse is to try to calm people down and get everyone to see the humanity in the people who are not part of our tribe at the moment and everything. But it's painful to do that, because you have to put up with so much abuse whenever you try to pull people out of their silos. And so it's really limiting what I can comfortably write right now, because I don't handle that kind of abuse very well, I guess. I didn't know that until just lately, but there's a certain point, there's a critical mass of people telling you, you're a pansy and a socialist and stuff, that where it stops being fun. So I don't know, Chris, I'm for the first time in a long time looking at kind of the end game for me too, and in this whole gloom and doom pundit thing. I don't know what dollarcollapse.com is worth right now, but in this kind of a world, I think it's a well-positioned property. And if the dollar starts to fall further and there are headlines about, is this a dollar collapse? I might just put the thing up for sale and kind of amble off into the sunset here, just because the world doesn't seem salvageable right now. And that's, it's a frustrating thing, but maybe it's the time of life for that to happen. I don't know. We'll see. Sorry, I didn't mean to end it on a sad note. Let's wait. Gold is up. Silver is up. We're making a ton of money, all you gold bugs out there. So, let's end on that, because that's the single happy part of our story right now, is that anybody who listens to sites like yours, is making really good money right now. And that's a good thing.
Sure. I'm with you on this has become, it's getting more and more emotional. And my framing for that is that People's buttons are being pushed by professionals, right? So the whole balkanization of thought is really, it's not by accident. There are real pros out there,
Well, Chris, you had Matt Taibbi on a while ago,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay, well, his book Hate Incorporated is about exactly that. You know,
yeah,
he explains how the media has been perverted to get us angry
yeah,
and to put us into different tribes. And yeah, so
yeah.
it's I mean, it's a real thing that's actually happening.
So there's that. So people are getting played, and
Hmm.
B, our main narratives are all breaking down and shredding. So our main narrative in the United States might go something like a couple of warts here and there, but by and large, we're a good nation of good people who do good things. And then you find out that the pharma companies are actively harvesting and killing people. It just came out today that Coca-Cola had paid off scientists to muddy the waters around the idea that maybe sugar wasn't a great thing to consume lots of, right? And on and on and on, so you find out all these corporations, where you're fed these ads of Coke, the all American, whatever. Well, if Coke is all American and they're out there perverting science to make us sick so they can make an extra few cents, that's not a great narrative. And then there's all these other narratives that sort of shredding, that we have the idea that we have a democracy, that, there's a fair table that's not too overly tilted, that everybody has an equal shot, like all those things are just like falling away, like scales off of our eyes, and so that's an emotional process, not an intellectual process. And so for a lot of people, I get it. They're having an adjustment reaction right now, and they don't know what to make sense of things. So it becomes vitriolic and very emotional, which I get. And it's unfortunate because I think that's actually really reducing people's quality of life. And I think a lot of people are spending cycles really agitating over things that fundamentally could not and won't improve their quality of life if they even got to a resolution around them, on and on and on. So I think this is a great time to, build education, educate people like you do, like I do, help them see the larger context, because this is an extraordinary time if you're not weighed down in the noise, where I believe generational sort of fortunes, if you want to look at it from a monetary standpoint, but generational, I'll use fortunes in a more broad term, meaning the larger trajectory of those who follow you will be defined by the steps we take today, because this is it. Lots of things breaking down and reforming at this period of history. It's really extraordinary what's going on, and little actions are going to make a big choice. If you bought that piece of farmland, instead of putting that next chunk of money into Netflix, I think that's going to have a really big outcome difference long term, for the people who make those decisions. And you can't make those decisions unless you're out of the noise. You got to get your head up out of that. But
yeah, the best thing a person can do right now is turn off Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and Facebook, and then use the massive amount of time that's freed up for some kind of positive action.
yeah,
Face to face with other people, and building something that's of value physically. And if it frees up a couple hours a day, you can do amazing things with a couple hours a day in the long run. A year of that transforms your life. So that's the positive way of looking at this. That we see a path that is quite doable for most people, and will pay big dividends down the road. So focus on that. Don't worry so much about the the macro thing, because it's going to be ugly and crazy no matter what. But you can fix, you can tend your own garden. You can fix things that are right in front of you.
yep. Well said. Thank you. I always treasure our time here, and you're all the way across the country, and it feels like you're right next door.
Yeah.
And even if you were, we'd still be Zooming because, COVID. So
Yeah.
thanks for your time again today. And
Oh, sure thing. Always good to talk to you.
likewise.